Imagine if I told you that your life is happening within a computer simulation. It might sound absurd, but millions around the globe have encountered strange and terrifying events that support this theory. You see, if our existence is a computer simulation, it would have bugs and glitches, just like any other program. These inconsistencies in reality momentarily reveal the simulation as lines of code created by an unknown power, controlling everything we perceive as real. People are now actively looking for these bugs, sharing their findings widely, especially online. These reports range from erased memories to people disappearing without a trace. So, pay close attention to these stories. They might help you realize that you're living in a world far stranger than you could ever imagine. Here are 5 individuals who discovered that we are living in a simulation. Something is wrong with my girlfriend. The lockdown during the pandemic has impacted us all. It's forced us to remain indoors much more, leading to boredom, disconnection, and apathy. However, for a man named Tony, spending so much time in his apartment led him to encounter a real glitch in the matrix. Before the lockdown, Tony's life was going well. He was a PhD student at a prestigious university's computer science department and lived with his girlfriend, Jenna. By the time the pandemic hit and lockdown began, Tony and Jenna had been together for years and knew each other intimately. They knew each other's personal histories, preferences, and certainly all about each other's jobs. As with many glitches in a simulation, Tony's first hint that something was amiss was subtle. One morning, he walked into the kitchen and saw Jenna making a cup of coffee. She had always been a coffee lover and had often criticized Tony for putting sugar in his coffee, saying it ruined the taste. But there was Jenna, standing at the kitchen table, adding sugar to her coffee. When Tony questioned her about it, Jenna seemed surprised and told him, "I've always put sugar in my coffee." Initially, Tony tried to dismiss this as a mistake on his part, but then other changes in Jenna's behavior became apparent. Several of her routines altered, and even her likes and dislikes flipped. Tony began to feel as if Jenna had been replaced or reprogrammed as a completely new person. The biggest shock came when, during the pandemic, Tony and Jenna were working from home. As Tony was working on his laptop, Jenna asked him, "How's Larry doing?" Tony didn't know a Larry. When he told her this, Jenna got angry, insisting, "Of course, you know Larry. He works with you at the company. You're always talking about him." Tony tried to convince Jenna that Larry didn't exist, but she was certain that Tony knew Larry because they both worked at the same company. When Tony reminded her that he was a university PhD student and had never worked at a company, she couldn't accept it. Something had gone very wrong for one of them. It was as if one of their lives had been reset and altered. But whose? Was Jenna hallucinating the entire time? Or did she remember things as they were before the glitch? Was it Tony's life that had been rewritten, an update of sorts, where his life had been changed for an unknown reason? Or was Jenna the glitch herself? Neither of them could come to terms with this drastic change in their lives, and they still can't. They were left wondering if they could even trust each other. The most unsettling thought is that one of them might have been aware of the change all along. After all, some people are NPCs in the game, and others aren't. If we are indeed living in a simulation, how many of our closest friends and family members are in on it? The question to ask yourself is, could you be living in your own personal Truman Show?
My husband thinks we both died. A commonly reported type of glitch involves the everyday world changing suddenly without warning. Sometimes it's just a subtle change. Other times, it feels like the entire world has transformed into something new and unfamiliar. One particular case stands out because this strange shift in perception affected not just one person, but two. Many years ago, Cheryl and Jason were happily dating, seeing where their relationship would go. During this period, a tragedy should have ended their relationship in a horrifying manner. One night, Jason was driving his truck with a friend for company when he hit a bad patch of black ice. There was no way to avoid it at his speed, and his truck slid into oncoming traffic. Cars swerved out of the way, but Jason was helpless at the wheel as his truck slid across the ice. Two headlights beamed through his windshield as an oncoming car smashed into his truck. The vehicle rolled over and was completely mangled by the impact. When paramedics arrived on the scene, they were amazed to see Jason and his friend standing by the side of the road, both unhurt. Looking at the wreckage, the paramedics couldn't believe anyone could survive such a crash. The insurance company later examined the vehicle and couldn't understand how two people walked out of such a crushed and twisted wreck. The crash investigators couldn't see how it was possible. Jason and his friends should have died. A few days after the crash, Jason visited Cheryl at her apartment. They were casually talking when Jason started looking at the flat-screen TV in Cheryl's room. He then nonchalantly asked, "Where's the other TV?" Cheryl told him it was the same television they had since they started dating. But Jason was convinced that instead of a flat screen, she had an old tube television. Time passed, and Jason maintained that something strange had happened during the car crash, and that details like the television in Cheryl's room had somehow switched after it. 7 years passed, and by this time Cheryl and Jason were married. While on vacation in Italy, Cheryl suddenly became very ill while sightseeing. She had cramps and began bleeding. Panicked, she cried for help, and Jason called for an ambulance. Cheryl was rushed to the hospital, where the doctor said she had an ectopic pregnancy. She was taken to emergency surgery, where the pregnancy was tragically terminated and removed. When Cheryl regained consciousness, the doctor told her that if she had waited any longer to call an ambulance, she certainly would have died. It was almost a miracle she survived that amount of bleeding. In fact, the doctor couldn't account for it in all his years of practice. 2 months after that emergency, Cheryl was back home recovering with Jason. The couple's conversation turned to fire risks in their home. Cheryl confidently stated that Jason didn't need to worry because they had bought and installed a fire extinguisher in a cupboard before their trip to Italy. But again, this puzzled Jason. Just like the changing television, Jason told Cheryl there was no fire extinguisher in their home. Cheryl laughed and tried to remind him about how they argued about where to install it, finally agreeing on the cupboard. To prove her point, she opened the cupboard only to find there was no fire extinguisher and no evidence it had ever been there. No fittings or holes where they had placed the screws. Cheryl thought it was a trick, but Jason reminded her about the switching television and how it seemed to be the same phenomenon. After thinking about the situation for a while, Jason came to a startling conclusion. He realized the television had switched after his car crash, the same crash he should have never survived. Then the disappearing fire extinguisher that Cheryl swore was real happened shortly after her brush with death. Again, a situation she was lucky to survive. A growing sense of dread fell over the couple as they looked around their lives and saw things were known as they should have been. Jason believed they had both died in those instances and that their lives had been reset like a game so they could continue in the simulation. For Jason and Cheryl, the afterlife isn't heaven, but the same life lived over and over with no evidence of their deaths but for a few glitches along the way to unnerve them. The coughing fit. In some simulation films like The Matrix, seeing a cat twice reveals that something has changed or been altered. Interestingly, there might be a real-world glitch involving an animal, though this time it was a dog. It was an afternoon like any other. Ken's house was quiet as he sat on the couch watching television when he noticed his dog choking on something. Jumping off the couch, he helped the dog cough up a piece of food stuck in its throat. After the panic subsided and he made sure the dog was fine, Ken continued watching television, but became more aware of what was happening with the dog. He watched as the animal walked past him and lay down on its bed, which was on the other side of the couch, just out of view. Ken listened as the dog fell into a deep sleep, snoring, which was normal. What was unusual was the horrible sound the dog made. It was like the dog was dying. It let out a cough and a hacking wheeze that Ken had never heard before. There was something strange about it, as if the animal was taking its last breath. Although Ken felt uneasy, he got off the couch and rushed to the dog's bed to help. As soon as the dog's bed came into view, the sound stopped. Ken stood in disbelief. He could see the bed, but the dog was gone. He checked the door to the room, which was closed. Even if the dog had gone through it, it would have had to pass Ken. With his heart racing, he started to think that something terrible had happened to his dog. It seemed as though the dog had been erased from existence, and those horrible, gasping breaths were its last moments as the animal was deleted. Searching the house, he couldn't find his pet. It wasn't hiding anywhere, and no matter how loudly he called its name, he was only met with silence. Just as Ken began to believe that his dog had glitched out of existence forever, he heard barking outside. Rushing out, he found his parents with the dog. When he asked how long they had been with the dog, They said they had been out for a walk for at least 30 minutes. Ken was so frightened by the experience that he stayed outside in the sunlight, trying to dispel the unsettling notion that he had witnessed a glitch in the Matrix. If his dog was outside, then what had been walking around inside his home? A duplicate or something unnameable? My sister knows things about people she's never met. A glitch in the Matrix doesn't always mean things change or people act differently. It can also occur when someone can do things that shouldn't be possible, as if the glitch has bent the laws of physics around them, granting extraordinary powers. If we are in a simulation and glitches happen occasionally, could they produce similar effects in our real world? One of the most compelling accounts comes from Sarah. Sarah's little sister Diana can do things others can't, and Sarah is convinced it's due to a bug in the system. The glitching phenomena around Diana started even before she was born. When Sarah's mother was pregnant with Diana, strange things happened around their home. Objects would disappear and reappear suddenly, and a box with Sarah's mom's wedding dress in it seemed to move from the attic to the bathroom floor without anyone seeing how. When her mother found the box and the wedding dress, she immediately started having contractions and bleeding. After being rushed to the hospital and undergoing several tests, the doctors told her mother that her unborn child, Diana, had a genetic disorder that might cause developmental delays and disabilities. Soon after Diana was born, the family gave her all the love and care they could to help her through the challenges she faced. Thankfully, though Diana faced challenges, she was very high functioning. From an early age, she would look up at the ceiling and talk, and Diana's mother thought she was talking to someone no one else could see. When Diana was about 4 years old, she was taken to a Christmas party for children with similar conditions. While waiting in line to see Santa Claus, Diana ran to a stranger, grabbed the woman's leg, and started crying. When the woman asked Diana what was wrong, Diana replied, "I'm so sorry that your mama left you." The woman then teared up and told Diana's mom that her own mother had died of cancer just a few nights prior. Somehow Diana had known. Incidents like this happened repeatedly. When Diana was 10 years old, she would talk to the corner of the room, but no one was there. When asked who she was talking to, she simply said, "Her grandpa." Her grandfather had passed away 5 years earlier. Diana then told her family she also spoke with her real grandmother. This was Diana's biological grandmother, not her step-grandmother. And she didn't even know this person existed and had passed on. When Diana described the woman she was talking to, the clothes she described matched those worn by her biological grandmother. She said the woman was wearing a yellow wig. This was correct, as her grandmother had suffered hair loss from an illness when she was younger. Finally, when asked if she knew the grandmother's name, Diana replied, "Jeannie." The family was shocked. Jeannie was the name of her real grandmother, and no one had ever mentioned her to Diana, as she had been estranged from the family for decades. Even into adulthood, Diana still exhibits her remarkable gift. When her sister Sarah got married, she received a phone call from Diana, crying hysterically and telling her to leave her house. At that moment, Sarah's husband came home drunk and attacked her. Sarah left her husband that night, believing it was her sister's tears that gave her the strength to do so. So what do we make of all this? We've discussed psychics before, and Diana seems to exhibit some of those strange skills. But what if they aren't supernatural? The existence of this true story suggests that strange psychic powers may be given by whoever or whatever runs the program, feeding them information they couldn't otherwise discover. But if this is true, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Perhaps it's only a matter of time before someone out there has power so vast they could do anything.